Welcome to Out of the Lab, a podcast interviewing entrepreneurs who've taken research out of the lab and built it into a company that's serving the world. These entrepreneurs are heroes, and the planet needs more of them. So tune in, learn from their successes and failures, and get inspired. Visit bountiful.org to join our community and realize your power to save the world. Hello and welcome to Out of the Lab. I'm your host, Max Finder. Today's guest is Livio Valenti. Livio is one of the co-founders of a company called Vaxess Technologies. It's a spin out from Tufts University from the lab of Professor Omenetto and Professor Kaplan, David Kaplan and Fiorenzo Omenetto. They were working on new materials, and at the same time, Livio discovered their work via a TED Talk, which we'll link to in the show notes, of Professor Omenetto. And Livio had been working with the UN in Cambodia, working to help rice farmers convert their fields to silk and try to generate a higher value product. And so this silk didn't meet the requirements for luxury textiles. It was well suited to other things like what Professor Omenetto and Professor Kaplan were cooking up in their lab. The ultimate thing that emerged from this is part of the technology that Vaxess developed, which is firstly a MIMIX, which the name of the product. It's a smart release therapeutic patch that only after a few minutes of wear time releases treatments into the skin. So they were thinking about vaccines. Now they're starting to look into cancer treatment, chemo, things like that. It's become very relevant, obviously, in deploying the Pfizer Moderna vaccine in developing countries. So it's a natural, water soluble, and inexpensive silk-based patch that can deliver these badly needed drugs without needing to be cooled. That's one of the major challenges in the developing world is having to keep these vaccines and drugs and other things like that cool and in fridges. And so it's a really exciting product. They've been working on it for almost 10 years now. Livio tells the story about how he discovered this technology, how he courted and approached and dated, so to speak, Professor Omenetto. He talks about the non-dilutive funding that they got and a million other things that are the step-by-step processes for how he took this technology and turned it into what it is today. He gives advice for young entrepreneurs and scientists, and it's a really excellent and enjoyable episode. So give it a listen. Visit bountiful.work to learn more, to sign up to our newsletter. We have a really awesome community cooking, and we'd love to have you. So more on that soon, and enjoy the episode. Thanks. Livio, thanks for joining.
Hi, Max. Thanks for having me today.
So maybe we can start with how Vaxess was formed. I know that the story of your earlier work with the UN is connected with it, and I'd love to hear the whole context for how you joined Vaxess and how your involvement in the company came to be.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, when I was working for the United Nations that you mentioned in Cambodia. So it was my first job. I came out of an economics degree studying in Italy, and most of my friends went to work for banks and investment banks and things like that. And I was trying to look for other options, and I look at the World Bank, was like still sounded like a bank, but maybe it was doing something a bit differently. And the UN obviously is tangentially connected to that type of work. So I was started to thinking about what I could do in the area. So I thought I was gonna be going to either Washington D.C. where the World Bank is, or New York where the United Nations is. But I ended up being in Phnom Penh, which is a little bit more in the periphery of the world. So I ended up there being an economist, mostly working on agriculture projects, because Cambodia is almost like a rural economy. Is 85% is composed by farmers, and like most of those farmers are just subsistence agriculture farmers. So they are growing some rice, and they don't have that much, diversification of the agriculture project. So I started to work on a project to think about how we could diversify their economy. Maybe there could be something around the agriculture field. So I studied like other countries, and Korea was an interesting example of how they made a big transition between agriculture and industry really, really fast. So I was fascinated. I was trying to study what was there, with my economist hat. I was like, what was there that really linked agriculture with industry? And one of the things was silk. And you might ask me, why? Why silk? How is that related? Silk is really between agriculture and industry, because you have an agricultural component in which farmers need to produce silk. And then you have an industrial component in which companies, factories need to reel these very fascinating materials that we all know about in our ties and clothes and fancy items that we buy. So that was a little interesting. So what we did, we pitched this idea to the United Nations, and we said maybe we should help those farmers to grow some silk. And actually we got a pretty nice project going that was about hundreds of farmers around the country, and we were trying to help them to grow silk. And the agricultural part, it was very successful. So we were able to teach those farmers how to make silk cocoons, how to raise silkworms. The industrial part was hard. So I was looking around and I was thinking, how can we use silk for other things that are not just the typical clothes and garment and things that we all know about, but they're not very expensive. They're very low margins. So long story short, I saw a TED talk. So TED talks are fascinating. I think that's why I really like your podcast and your approach, because you can learn tons of things that you haven't heard about. So I saw this TED talk, and there was a professor named Fiorenzo Omenetto from Tufts University, and he was talking about silk and all the property that silk has, not as a textile material, but as a new material in the area of biomaterials, in the area of implantable, photonics, biomedical engineering, and I was fascinated by that. So the technologies were really being developed with a lot of government funding, over the years, and silk was being investigated as a novel material for defense application, for bulletproof vest, all the way to tissue engineering, scaffoldings, things that were very obscure to me. So long story short, I ended up coming to Cambridge here in the US, and I connected with the professor, and we decided to think about how can we leverage some of my experience at the UN with some of their technologies that they had, mostly around the idea of what is the biggest problem that we cannot solve in my side of the world, which was developing countries, very poor area, lack of infrastructure. So that's why we started to think about what is kind of the most ambitious project that we could ever think about, right? And we come up with a couple of ideas, and we start thinking about how could we spin off a company. So that's a little bit of the background, but yeah.
So I love that. So you're a guy who's close to a problem. And can I ask, like, what were some of those key problems that were at the top of the list that you arrived at Professor Omenetto's lab with?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem was really like, how do we transport medications to places that don't have cold chain? And it sounds like a very simple, kind of dumb problem, right? Like, I mean, we have refrigerators, and we all live, I grew up near Florence, and I mean, we do have refrigerators, and in the US you do have refrigerators, but when you go to places like that, I remember driving like hours and hours in a very bumpy road, and then you get to a little village, and then there's a shack, and that's a healthcare clinic. I'm like, wait, that's a healthcare clinic? How do you get your vaccines? How do you get your medications when you don't have a fridge, right? And how do you um, even go to these places when you're very far? So I was very shocked by that. And again, um, coming from that background of a very easy type of environment, I never thought that there was a problem, and logistic was one of them. So the distance of healthcare clinic was very huge. I think the average distance from villages were like 30, 40, 50 miles. So people actually walked there, or they took like an ox cart. And so, you know, really you have to imagine this, you have to project yourself into a place that most people have never seen. And I was very lucky that I was working there for about 3 years, and I was seeing it every day. That was my job, right? I needed to go to see these people, see what they wanted, try to, you know, maybe bring them some fertilizer, maybe bring them some. So the biggest problem was really around, you know, making sure that people had access to healthcare. And within that problem was that people didn't have most of the basic things like vaccines. So vaccines are one of the most incredible things. I mean, now we all know, right? But like even 2 or 3 years ago, they were still pretty amazing, even if you didn't have a global pandemic. But you know, with a very few cents, you can immunize someone against a deadly disease. You can take someone that, you know, could die of polio, could die of measles or some other disease, and you can give them a shot for life, and they will never get sick, and that costs less than $1. So if you think about it in terms of investment, that's a pretty good place to start if you want to have a big impact. No.
I think I agree. And so that problem, hands down, was at the top of your list when you arrived at Professor Omenetto's lab.
It was more like a conjunction of things. I mean, they were really working across the spectrum. They had like, you know, hundreds of things going on in the lab around how do you use this new protein. There was a lot, you know, there's still a lot of excitement around, you know, discovering, you know, a new material. But one of the things that they've been investigating, you know, was really removing cold chain from some of the most, you know, from some medication like penicillins, you know, or, and in the TED talk, Professor Omenetto talks about it a lot in terms of what if you imagine a future in which you can put drugs in your wallet and now they don't need to be refrigerated. So he was thinking about different formats, different way of delivering them. Maybe they're like microneedles, maybe they are, you know, oral strips that you can ingest, or a bunch of things that were enabled by this core technology of stabilization, of molecule stabilization. So taking something that needs to be in the fridge and then making sure that now can be very happy outside of the fridge. So that's what really like what drove the initial interaction. I was like, wait, you can do that? It's like, you know how hard it is to bring a vaccine to these places that have been working for so many years. And so it was really like a little bit of like, okay, so we have a technology, or, you know, an initial concept around that, a potential application, and the problem is very big. So I think we're able to link those two things that were very disconnected in a way, you know, and I think that's how kind of we started to dream big about what we could do in this area.
And what I would love to understand in more detail is when you show up to Professor Omenetto's lab. I mean, I know this might sound ridiculous, but I really would love to understand the steps in that. I mean, you saw his TED talk, you sent him an email, you say, "Hi, I'm here with the UN in Cambodia. I'm interested in your technology." Like all this, yeah, yeah. And why and what convinced him, do you think, to even take you seriously, or is it by nature that he is just that type of person to do that, or?
Yeah, so because for me, I think I came very naive into this process. I mean, I never heard about technology transfer. I never heard about, you know, my latest scientific class was in, you know, in high school, right? I just came with really like an idea saying here we can solve a big problem. I mean, the whole world is trying to solve this problem. The WHO is trying to solve this problem. UNICEF is trying to solve this problem. The whole UN, you'll become like a hero if you can solve the refrigeration problem. I mean, this is a huge, huge, huge problem. So I was more like, I want to find a solution, whatever way we can do it. Maybe like, you know, the UN can pick it up. And obviously we quickly realized that was not the best way to spin off innovation. But I came very naive into the process. So it was more still like, hey, you know, first of all, we do have a lot of farmers here, and we produce a lot of silk, and they're not making a lot of money with that, you know, making wedding clothing, you know. So maybe we can use the silk for some of your work. So I sent him some of the material and said, can you see if this can be used for your, you know, scientific stuff? That was kind of my level of
the scientific
deafness,
stuff, right?
Yeah, and I spent 10 years now working on this scientific stuff, and
Right.
I do feel I understand it a little bit more now. But you know, it's really like two different worlds kind of colliding. And then, you know, I think one of the things that was very important is that when we start having a more direct relations. We ended up traveling to Cambodia together to actually see those farmers. So I took him on a trip and I said, do you want to come to see what these farmers are like, right? And it was an incredible trip. We went there for about 10 days. We traveled, to Singapore, and then we traveled to Cambodia, and we traveled to the silk farms, and we went to see those people that could be affected by using these materials. And I think that was very important that people realized that the potential was not just the science itself, but was improving the livelihood of those people that are producing silk as a study material. Most of the time, I think in the scientific labs, people just receive materials, right? You get you call Sigma Aldrich, you get your materials in a very good quality. You don't know where they come from. When you think about biomaterials, there is a history behind it. Silk has a 5,000 years history. Silk was used by the emperors and by royal families around the world. It's considered like a luxury material. It's considered royal. It's considered is a unique product. And biomaterials are they have a history and they come from somewhere. So I think that mix of it wasn't just about let's spin off another company. It was more like we have a huge problem here that the whole world is trying to solve with very weak technologies, with very weak options, and we can bypass all that. And I think that's kind of how we got to think about together how we could do something. And obviously, probably looking back, out of all the different technologies that this lab was developing, this was probably the most difficult one, right? We could have done many other things much faster. And if you're sitting down and do a strategy and say, what is the 10 things that you want to spin off from this lab? And let's pick the most valuable. Maybe let's pick the one that can make the most money. Let's pick up the one that has the shorter time. You can strategize. I mean, people do this for a living, right? You prioritize, and you can say, okay, now let's think about that, optimizing. This was really like we start from that problem, and we just honestly wanted to solve it, and we just jumped in, and then a bunch of people came along and sharing their vision very early on. So that's kind of how thing got started.
Yeah, I love that. I love every part of this, and I'm gonna continue to press on this one topic just because it's extremely interesting to me. Naive Livio knocking on Professor Omenetto's door. Like, at what point did he agree to go on a trip with you to Cambodia? Like, what you say you're naive. I mean, I'm trying to understand, I guess, how you convinced him to take you seriously, or was it your resume or the way that you were thinking about it, do you think? Or if you had to venture a guess about why he took a chance on you in a way. Because like you said, I mean, they're developing a ton of technologies. This is the hardest problem that they could have tried to solve, or the most complicated technology that they could have used. I mean, why do you think they drilled into this?
Yeah, I think it was a very long dating process.
Right. Yeah, that's what I want to hear about, the dating process. Yeah.
So yeah, and it was like it's really like natural in a sense because I came here to Cambridge to do my my grad school. So we were living not too far from each other. His lab was a couple of miles from Harvard, so it wasn't that hard to have a continuous constant dialogue over the course of a couple of years. So this again was not a typical I want to do a spin-off, let me go find a technology and study. It was really like I think the fact that I was in school really helped because I had time to kind of dedicate to this project on as I was a student. So I had 2 years, right, as I was a master's student that I could first of all I brought this technology to a class. And that's where we all connected with my co-founder. So Harvard Business School had a class that is called used to be called Commercializing Science. So it's interesting that because you get professors coming to the class, then you get a bunch of students from all the different schools, and you actually start preparing a business plan for the technology. So I introduced the professor to the class, and he came along, and then my classmates were very excited to work on this project. So that's how we met with the team, and then slowly we start building on that as we were students. So it's a semester that you spend. And then after that, someone graduated and we're like, okay, what are we going to do this summer? Or maybe we're going to work on this. So we continue to build the confidence and to build that relationship over a long period of time. And, obviously, like, it wasn't immediate that we said, okay, let's do a company. It was very, very step by step. Let's say first was a class. and then we see how we work together. We all love to work together. We were very like, but it wasn't like none of us was thinking of starting a company. It was more like you just cannot not do it. You get to the point in which we just have to try, right, at this point, because we won the business plan competition at Harvard, and we won. For us, those were like, very huge achievement at the time. Obviously, looking back, it's like, okay, we won a student competition, but for us, we're like, maybe I'm not gonna take my consulting job after, my grad school. And my co-founders also did the same thing. All of them had a pretty standard path, ahead, which was great, but somehow we couldn't miss this opportunity, and we really like took a bite at the time, and slowly we got to the point in which we're like, okay, we're just gonna do the big leap of faith. We're gonna, make the breakup call with the consulting firm, say we're not going, and then the clock started ticking at that point. But it wasn't, a structured process. It was nothing, engineered from the beginning. So I don't have too many lessons to offer in that sense of,
Well, that's
how
what I
you
was
actually work. Yeah.
that's what I was about to ask you, is if you had to distill a lesson or a piece of advice that you would maybe apply, like if you even had to do this again, right, for a different
Yeah, doing
job.
it again, I think is different because you get that experience. I mean, I worked 10 years on these products, on this technology. So you learn a lot in terms of, what models are out there and how you can do it again, and what are the things, the failure and success. So I think if you come completely with zero experience, you have to find a unique kind of, serendipity in that sense. That is a clash of things that you meet the person that you really admire scientifically, you build a very good relationship, you spend a lot of time together, like, and then you are, you're not imposing on anyone, right? Like, I could have done many other things, they could have done many other things, but we ended up that we wanted to do this together, right? So that's the thing. So I think if it's your first experience, I think when you're in school, it's really like a great place to start, because there is a lot of scientific research in the same school that you probably have. There is a lot of need of people with business or more like, non-scientific background to bring a different perspective into this mix. So, 1 or 2 years of either grad school or when you're undergrad, I think that's probably the best place to start, because honestly, like, as you ask, why would you do it with me? I mean, who am I to do a company with, right? Like, so it needs to be something that is based on building a long-term, understanding, and I think that's probably the best place to start. Once you have experience, you can do it again and again and again. And I think podcast and content like yours really are bringing some more structure to people that might not want, to try to be entrepreneurs in this area. But like, if you see others that have done it, and you see that, there is a big value in structuring those contents in this way. But most of the time, I think people that do it for the first time, it's always a story like this. Like, it's always something that is because of, whatever reason. And then next time you can do it again a little bit more structured, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a combo of curiosity and, in wanting to solve a hard to solve problem, and also, like you said, serendipity. I would love to hear about some of the steps that happened after. So you guys applied. So you met your co-founder in the Harvard class, right? And you guys, with Professor Omenetto and your other co-founder, you applied to this business plan competition. You won it. When you turned down the consulting job, what happened then?
Yeah, so I think once we won this competition, was more like, wow, this is real. I mean, it was $70,000.
Right.
It was called Harvard President Challenge. So the whole goal was about finding solution that could solve big problems. So we felt like, wow, we do have something here, and then we went crazy to do fundraising. So we started to think about how can we do fundraising, and obviously this technology was very early. It was very early stage. We have to be honest about that. And as many technology needed a lot of refinement, and it needed a lot of workarounds, and so we were lucky because we closed. So first, I think, yeah, we closed a Series A round, was around $4 million in 2013, and so that was really like in conjunction with my graduation. But my co-founders, they graduated a year earlier. So, they spent that year working on fundraising. So it was a great achievement for us that we were able to close in May 2013. At the same time, we were working on grants. So we started applying for a bunch of NIH grants, NSF grants, and other grants to complement that. And obviously, it was the fundraising was the trigger for making kind of more life changing decision in the sense that we were going to do it, because none of us again was thinking of starting a company. I wanted to go back to the UN, right? That was my path. I was going back, and finally they were going to send me to New York, or maybe I was going to go to consulting, right? Like those are the two paths for me. And my co-founders also had, very, very clear idea what they should do after business school. And Catherine was in the, she's doing a postdoc at Harvard. So that was a little bit of life-changing decision that came with the fact that we're able to raise a substantial amount of money. Again, now we hear like bigger amounts for Series A's, but 2013 in this type of field, I mean that was a substantial amount of funding to get you started.
It sounds like it, especially for something right out of the university. And so, I mean, when you won the competition, I'd love to hear a little bit about, for instance, when you started thinking about patents, when you engaged with the tech transfer office, things like that, and what stage.
Yeah, the ecosystem. I mean, the ecosystem that we're playing with, it's probably the easiest to start a company like that you can have, right? I mean, so we had a guy that was just walking around the Harvard Innovation Lab, and he's like, "Hey, I'm a lawyer. I like your technology. Do you want like us to work for you for free until you raise money?" We're like, "What? Really? That's in Italy would not work like that." And I mean, he ended up to be our, Jeff is our lawyer for 10 years now, and I mean, of course, he was doing some business development, but he also was betting on a young team and taking some, early risk. And I think, we didn't have to pay anything until, I don't know, we raised some amount of money, and that was a huge, help, right? Because you wouldn't have to pay, legal bills, and they helped us to negotiate the license. There was a long process. I mean, again, it was probably like a 6 to 9 months or even longer process to get to a license. Of course, we start with an option agreement. So we took it again step by steps, and we were filing IP and mostly like trying to validate the science, replicating some of the academic, initial proof of concept, building a scientific capability, hiring people, and I think when we raised, we already had an option agreement in place.
Yeah. Could you break down for the listeners specifically what that is and how it is different than a more traditional licensing agreement?
Yeah, so a license agreement can be very expensive, and it's a big commitment. It's it comes with a down payment. It comes with some pre-negotiated terms that you discuss with the university. So again, here's that the basic concept is that the university owns the intellectual property that was developed in the university, and we want to spin it off. We want to bring it into Vaxess in our case, right? So
and in this case, it was Tufts that you were negotiating with?
Yeah, exactly. So Tufts University, and they have a very good set of patents around protecting the technology. So what we did, we took a field of use that is very common way of doing this. So you get a field, and there is some patents that are behind that field of use. So for example, if you invent a new water bottle and you want to put tea, you're getting the patent that is how you build the bottle, what type of materials is for this bottle, but you only get it for putting tea inside, not water, not Coca-Cola. Like, so that's, you slice it up in that way. So we got an option that means that you pay a very small amount of money to basically like making sure that this IP and this field is not being presented to others. So you kind of, you buy in that time in which no one else can license this technology. And obviously there was a lot of interest around this technology. There was, few pharmaceutical companies were looking at this. There were few, other potential like entrepreneurs that were looking at this. So in that way, you're locking, the option to license in the future. So you're paying again a small amount of money. You negotiate some of the terms to bring some certainty around what the future license will look like. But it's it's up to you how many of those you could include. You can make an option agreement that literally says, pay me $10,000 not to shop these around and no other terms, but probably it's wise to put, at least some basic terms in there. And then for 1 year, we didn't have to worry about others, stealing this technology from us that we care about so much.
Do you remember what the field of use was?
Yeah, the field of use is pretty straightforward. So it's the idea of vaccine stabilization. So we took a field of use on vaccine. And stabilization is the idea of making vaccine that don't need to be refrigerated. So the specific protein that we work with is called silk fibroin. Again, it's extracted from natural silk. And the idea is that it creates a matrix around molecules of large molecules, like, vaccines and proteins and other biologics, and is able to stabilize it by entrapping the molecules in the silk matrix. So you're stopping molecular movement, you're stopping aggregation, so that the vaccine or the biomolecule does not kind of, disintegrate as, is unfolding, and they lose activity. So that's kind of the base of the science that we were spinning off at that time.
The science stuff, essentially.
Science stuff.
Yeah, the science stuff. Great. And so, yeah, maybe this is a good opportunity also to talk a little bit about the technology. I mean, obviously there was a big deal this year with vaccines. Are you involved in that? Are you trying to get involved? Is it applicable, or you're shifting more to cancer treatment? Maybe you can, I mean, that original field of use was or original invention was useful, but anything else you want to add on the technology,
Yeah.
Feel free.
I think there was a big kind of realization when we were dealing with the Gates Foundation. So the Gates Foundation has funded us over the years, almost like $7 million in grants to really develop the technology. And they challenged us a lot to think about not only stabilizing a vaccine, so not only take an existing vaccine, add your scientific stuff inside, and now you can get to place it without refrigeration, but try to change the format. Try to make the vaccine easier to be administered as well. So can the vaccine become, for example, like a patch, right? So we got pushed a lot in that direction. And I think there was a lot of realization that we could combine the stabilization component with the delivery component. So what we developed is a patch that is the size of a postage stamp. So you can apply in your skin directly, and it delivers your vaccine without any pain and without any refrigeration. And it also turns out to be much more efficacious because your skin is a better place to put the vaccine than your muscle, because your skin has been engineered to really protect you from outside stuff. And the muscle is not. So the muscle is not very immunogenic, and the skin is. So if you deliver a vaccine in the skin, you happen to trigger a host of better immune responses that turn out to be able to enable vaccine that couldn't happen before. And maybe you can take a vaccine that is 2 shots and reduce it into 1 shot, or 1 patch in this case. So combining those 2 formats, like stability and delivery, was when we unlock a lot of value in terms of private investment and venture capital funding and all that. And most of that has been kind of enabled also by public funding. So that's very important to us. We've been raising probably 30 millions in grants over the course of the last few years. So I think grants really enabled us to explore different formats, and everything is enabled by this silk protein. So that's kind of the thing that glue everything together, in a sense, is that we're using this unique properties of silk to enable some of those magic to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really cool that the non-dilutive funding pushed you in different directions. Is it because it was kind of non-dilutive money and allowed you to explore different avenues, or it came with strings attached, or what was the reason that it allowed that it pushed you into different directions? I mean,
I'll give an example. So when the Gates Foundation was, giving us a grant to explore these microneedles or patches application, they were putting a lot of criteria because they have the final users in mind, which are people living in developing countries. So a lot of research around, humidity, and a lot of research around maybe you don't need an applicator to put this patch. Maybe you can just put it with your thumb, But cost was the main component. Can we make it cheap? Can we make it like affordable for countries that, you know, they cannot buy the luxury products in a sense of healthcare? So, you know, because of that, we got the design to really try to be functional for that type of application. So I think some of the grants were pushing us in that direction. Also, I mean, at the beginning, we're just exploring the parameter space in terms of what can be done with this technology. I mean, we've been doing that a lot and we're still doing it. So we still get like some early grants to explore some potentials. And again, some of the things are very like, you know, moonshots. And some things are, you know, maybe a distraction if you want to call it like that, but we're discovering constantly like the parameter space of that. And we are very focused on clinical development, clinical translation now at this point, but we still keep a very, very small amount of projects that are trying to explore the new thing, the thing that could be very exciting. And you know, thanks to the grants and thanks to those funding, and maybe the investor would not, you know, allocate. And that's exactly why some of these programs exist. If you look at the NSF, you know, one of their criteria to get their SBIR grant is that you should do something very risky that your investor will not give you money for.
Right.
So it's pretty amazing the way that this is pushing you to try. And if it doesn't work, someone else will make it work 10 years from now. So there's scientific evidence will be collected. Like, so we have a couple of projects like that that are really like moonshots, but most of it now is really like trying to focus on the vaccine development. And, you know, going back to your question of, you know, when COVID hit last year, we were one of those companies that were very well positioned to try to address some of those, you know, shortcomings of the vaccine distribution. So we are developing, you know, a solution that is around a vaccine patch that could be easily distributed, maybe, you know, through Amazon, maybe through, you know, other pharmacies, and you can do it at home. You can ship it to your office, and maybe contain multiple vaccines instead of only one. And maybe only needs, you know, one shot. So we are working on that, and hopefully we make some good progress, especially around the booster shots. So people will not want to go, you know, every 6 months to the doctor to get a shot. So we can simplify that. And obviously, when it comes to developing countries, we're seeing now that we really need to vaccinate the whole world. It's
Yeah.
not a US problem, it's not an Italian problem, it is a problem of, you know, India problem, it's an African problem, it's everyone's problem. So making sure that we can make those vaccines accessible around the world, I think is going to be a huge priority for us in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it seems like a big deal. And I mean, I think it's the Pfizer vaccine needs to be like super cooled, right? I mean, it's unusable almost in a lot of the world, right?
It's a luxury product. I mean, I
Yeah.
talk to a lot of, you know, people in developing countries, and they say, you know, we cannot buy those mRNA products because that, yeah, we can buy them, but then we can distribute them. So Thailand, you know, Laos, Cambodia, those are all the countries I know well, but even like places like Brazil or obviously like, you know, India, the logistic challenges are just immense.
Yeah.
So having a solution like this could really help in the global health. So we felt relevant. We felt, you know, we could do something during this time, and so that's probably what kept us pretty sane in the past year or so.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, you know, the mRNA stuff. They're talking about how the next stop is cancer, and you see, you know, there's also people in Africa with cancer that are going to be unable to get access to this stuff unless something like something like Vaxess can bring it to them. So it's very exciting. And then just as maybe a sidestep, you know, it seems like you work with pharmaceutical companies. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the importance on engaging with industry and how you approach that, or early on, even
Yeah,
if you can?
no, for sure. No, that's a, you know, that's a very good question. No, there's no secret that we are partnering with, you know, a bunch of pharmaceutical companies, and it's very exciting for me as someone coming from more like, you know, the public sector. You know, you have some perception about, you know, pharmaceutical companies, and again, this is my own opinion, but you know, I see the value of the scientific, you know, research that goes in some of those companies, which is unbelievable, and it's really great to be able to partner with some of them. Um, I think one time I remember when we had the chance to meet Bill Gates a few years back, and you know, I was trying to approach kind of like a pitch to him with a very global health perspective. I was like, you know, um, we need funding to create this technology, so you know, we can make it as broadly accessible as possible. And Bill Gates was like, should really work with some pharmaceutical companies so they can scale this faster. You can bring it to market faster. So there is a lot of value in partnering, especially, early on, but also, for more larger distribution. And so we do have, very exciting partnership with selected companies that we are working with, some of them for a long time, some of them are new. So that's very exciting for us to be able to work with them, because our platform is very usable by pretty much anyone that has a vaccine. So that's a nice thing. Like, it's not that we are confined to a certain class of molecules. I mean, we can deliver anything as long as is the right amount with this patch. So we have been
and the early it's interesting, the advice that Bill gave you about partnering with them so that it'll accelerate the development of the technology. I guess what often industry is not so excited about stuff coming out of universities in some cases, right? Because it feels too nascent, it feels too early and undeveloped. I mean, how did you demonstrate that this was a technology for them, worth them taking seriously?
Yeah, I think it's kind of easy to do initial kind of small partnerships. So you can have like a feasibility study, maybe they send you some materials, you send them the data, like no one is going to get rich or poor with these type of things, but it validates your approach. And again, if one big pharma company wants to do it, maybe the other one wants to do it too. So obviously it's exploratory at the beginning. So don't expect like, $100 million front payment and, like a big partnership like that. But I think you can see that there is a lot of R&D that companies externalize. And, if a pharmaceutical company want to pay X amount of dollar to see some data, they will, right? And it validates your technology and you build on that. So I think that was relatively, easy for us to do these initial studies. And then obviously when it comes to paying, larger amount of dollars, then it becomes more complicated. But at that point you have more the data, you have the scientific data that can actually help you to demonstrate that.
Yeah, and you have more resources to do the deal together. I actually am very interested in the feasibility study methodology. I mean, I don't know if there's anything that you follow there or a book that you can recommend on that, or other resources or materials. But I mean, is there if you had to kind of break out the steps of that, the feasibility study? I mean, are there certain milestones that you can call out that are key to doing those early deals and early partnership explorations?
Yeah, I think there was, initial grants that validated the technology. There was, obviously some validation. So, when you get an NIH grant on, from NIAID, for example, in our case, or I think they bring some scientific credibility. So that's one. And then I think, yeah, I mean, just really trying to understand who you should talk to and in those companies. And I think for us was mostly the scientific teams, right? So before we even talk to the business development team, spending time with the scientific team, and there is always a scientific question that is exciting for scientists. So, most of the people working for companies are like people that really like in these scientific departments are interested about the mechanisms and discovering something new. So I think that was the angle for us, was engaging with people that were in the scientific departments on the R&D side of things. And then eventually when things work, they can bring it up to their business development teams, and then you can talk more business things. But I think it was really like the science first.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So start
because
with
the problem, I mean, if you're solving the problem, I mean, it's kind of saying, hey, I have a battery for your iPhone that you never need to charge. Do you want it? I mean, obviously you would want it, right? Obviously obviously Apple would want it, and Samsung would want it, and anyone else would want it. Now the question is like, can you do it, right? So that's the nice thing about what we do. I mean, and the challenge at the same time. I mean, all the things that I've been involved that I'm excited about, like there is not a marketing problem, right? I mean, if this thing works,
you're sold. They're sold on it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not, who would not want a battery and an iPhone that you never have to charge in your entire life, right? Or and now every day I go there and I plug my iPhone, like, but can you do it? And then you go into the details. Well, okay, it's not really that you never have to charge it. So it's like, maybe there is a battery you can charge once a week, or like, then you go down from this aspirational goal to the reality of the scientific innovation. And so in our case, it was really like, going from this idea of saying we can stabilize any vaccine or any molecules, and then say, well, it's not really any molecules, right? So maybe it's this class of molecule, or maybe it's in this format. So you narrow down from this big platform that you have to some key things that you can actually do very, very, very well, and then you focus on those.
Amazing. Livio, a couple more questions and then we'll close out. So if you had to give advice, and I know you did, you spoke about going to, go hanging out at a university and kind of just being curious and engaging with people. Is there any other advice you would give to young entrepreneurs that are looking to do something meaningful in the technology space or in commercializing a piece of research?
Yeah, I think I'm always confused when people want to be entrepreneurs, but they don't start from science. Because I'm like, where else are you gonna start from? Okay, you're gonna start from a problem that you see, and then you're confined to just the thing that you see, right? So that's a key challenge for me. Is like, everyone want to be an entrepreneur, but like, you see a problem that is maybe like affecting your narrow view of society because you grew up in a specific place. So a lot of people want to solve problem of food delivery, right? They want to make sure that you can deliver the food fast because they are hungry and they want the food faster, right?
Right.
But they probably have been to a place in which there is other more fundamental problems. I think they would try to solve those, but then how do you solve those if not with science? So I think digital technology gave us like an easy way of solving some of those problems, but do they give us a really good tool to solve fundamental problem? I don't think so. That's my personal view, but we can have a lot of digital solution to make our life a little bit better, especially in this side of the world. And people will you make a lot of money by doing that, but I'm not saying that you won't, but if you're trying to fundamentally change some of the things that are bringing some of the biggest inequality that we're seeing, like rich and poor, and access to different things like healthcare, and at that point you need to rely on science, because no one is going to invent the next internet because of they see the problem and they're just going to do it by themselves. This thing came from years and years of research. So all the good technologies that you can spin off today have been, someone thought about it like 20 years ago. I mean, mRNA, DARPA invested in Moderna in 2010, $25 million, and the idea was saying, can you make a vaccine in 3 weeks? Now, it was not 3 weeks. It was more like 3 months or 6 months, but that was the challenge, right? So someone thought about it, and now 10 years later, with a lot of public funding, public investment, people can really reach those, last mile, and making those technology become products. But don't forget that silica has been investigated for 30 years now.
Right.
And someone saw it before us, and so we're lucky that we can try to work on those things that have been built upon for years and years. So I think the best place to start a company is working with scientists, and you don't need to be a scientist to do it. You can still challenge yourself to bring value. Sometimes you question yourself, like, what am I doing here? But I think over time you can demonstrate that you can actually build a lot of value, bringing those different views and perspective, and hopefully your co-founder will have patience with you. So that's very important. So be nice. But I think that's key, that you can build upon some scientific research that is already out there, is in the world, is waiting for you to bring it out.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I like to distill from that. I love the if you're with your worldview as a student, like there's a million homework helping, course sharing, textbook sharing, whatever startups, but expanding your worldview and looking at some of the problems that are really plaguing humanity right now is a great way to try to find something to, worthwhile to solve. And starting with science is a really great, great thing. And so One more question. If you had to give yourself advice from 10 years ago, maybe, let's say, when you were embarking on this journey, what would you say to yourself? What would you do differently? Anything there?
Yeah, that's, I think it's important to always reflect on those things, right? And I think for me it was more like, um, obviously when you start working with venture investors and things get complicated. So I think if I had access to some of those contents about, like, I really did it step by step. I didn't know how this process worked, right? So many things that they're pretty obvious by just having some self-education that you can learn it pretty quick. But I just went along, and you listen to a lot of people and you learn from that. So I learned everything really, like, mostly from people that I met in person or I interacted with. So I didn't do a lot of kind of independent research on some of the aspects, like how do you deal with the boards, and how what are the things that you should do. So I think having more structure to that would be very, very important. And because if you rely only on your personal interaction, you're probably limiting yourself to, like, n number of people, right? Like, you cannot interact with tens of thousands of people. So, but if you read some good resources, if you listen to some good podcast or some good content, you can kind of just get all this distilled information that it might be very relevant, once you're facing things that maybe in the future. So I'm trying to do that now. Like, what is the next step? So, for example, if you have to go in the public markets, through an IPO, what are the things that that you should learn? What are the things you should consider? So I'm catching up on that. So I'm trying to anticipate a little bit of the next step and looking at scenarios. What are the scenarios that are more likely for us, and what are the things that you can anticipate? So be a little bit more like a chess player. I think I was not a chess player. I was more like a soccer player, right? I was just running toward the ball, trying to do my best, shooting in the goal. But, like, I think you can be more like a chess player than a soccer player. And so for me, this could be, is the next step. And so probably that's a little bit of a piece of advice. I don't know, maybe football player versus chess player, if you translate that to the US context. But try
Yeah,
to
I
be
don't
more
know what it
thoughtful
would
about that.
be. Yeah, something like that. Shooting a basketball versus playing chess. Livio, this has been excellent. Where can people find you? Where do you like to be approached, contacted, whatever?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach out, and always happy to learn from people that have ideas and projects, and very exciting that we could have this chat this morning.
Livio Valenti of Vaxess Technologies. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you to you guys.
Thanks for listening. But now we need your help. We're building a community of scientists, students, entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and investors to commercialize meaningful technology and research. Join us at bountiful.work today to find opportunities and realize your power to save the world.